Alright, so we've looked at these different properties of muscles. These are common to all muscle types. Now we want to look at the functions of muscles. And the way I think of these functions of muscles are basically the result of the properties of muscles. So these things happen because muscles contract. Okay, so let me write them up and then we'll go through them. Okay, so like I said, when I think of functions of muscles, I think of these as the results of muscle contraction. So when muscles contract, what happens? So this first one is motion. We described how we can have different types of motion depending on what type of muscle tissue we're looking at. So we could look at skeletal. And this motion created whenever skeletal muscle contracts, basically how we move our bones and walk around. This is called locomotion. But remember, we have 3 different types of muscle tissue, so we could also have cardiac muscle tissue. When it contracts, what does it result in? This is the movement of blood, or we could say pumping blood. And then your digestive system works off smooth muscles. So we'll say moving things from your stomach to your small intestine. This would be an action of your smooth muscle. So we'll just say digestion. Okay, so there's 3 different examples of motion that may come up on the test. This next one is maintenance of posture. So here's me standing up from the side. There's my 2 arms just chilling. There's me standing. If I didn't have this maintenance of posture, if I didn't have my skeletal muscles contracting all the time, this muscle tone, if I didn't have muscle tone, then here would be my legs, and I would be bent over like this. But these erector spinae muscles, these back muscles, these are contracting, pulling me. It's really lifting me up like this. So it gets me from this bent over position to this standing position. So these erector spinae muscles, these back muscles that you guys will look at in lab, this is helping us maintain our posture so we're not walking around. And he mentioned one in his lecture. This was the first year that he's ever mentioned it, but he mentioned the ascending colon fighting gravity. He was basically talking about how we're fighting gravity, this downward force acting on our bodies all the time. Skeletal muscles contracting to keep us upright position, maintaining our posture. But the other thing he talked about fighting gravity, we have the smooth muscle in the ascending colon. So let's say that's my head, and that's my chest and my abdomen. In this thing I have this large intestine, or this colon, and it's kind of shaped like this in the body. And this portion right here is the ascending portion. So it moves food in an upward direction against gravity, and that was just something that he was mentioning. So this maintenance of posture is fighting gravity. And when we look at skeletal muscle, that's really what's giving us our posture. Okay, stabilization of the joints. We just looked at joints in the skeletal system, so this picture should look pretty familiar. And if you guess that this is the knee, then you're correct. Here's my patella and my menisci. There's pads of fibrocartilage. We have my femur and my tibia. And then the different ligaments and things holding that together. And then we have the quad, which is this muscle up here. And we have the calf right here. So if you guys remember, we talked about this last semester, or last unit, we talked about this idea of muscle tone. How muscle tone is this ever-present contraction of skeletal muscle. So you're never fully relaxed. Even when you're relaxing your bicep, you're never fully relaxed. You always have a little bit of overlap of these myofilaments. We'll talk about those a little bit later. So this ever-present contraction of muscle. And if you go ahead and stick out your leg and move your knee around, sometimes you can shake your kneecap around if you're not flexing your leg. But if you flex that leg, you flex that quad, you'll see you flex this, it adds rigidity, muscle tone. Flexing your leg is like an exaggeration to demonstrate muscle tone, but you flex all that and then this knee joint can't move. So as you build up your muscles, as you lift weights and go on runs and do squats and stuff, you'll add more layers of muscle here, and these layers of muscle will also have muscle tone, which means there'll be ever more present contraction, and this joint will be stabilized. It doesn't allow a lot of free movement. Okay, so that's stabilization of joints, important. And then this last one's heat production. So the first one, creating motion, we already saw that. And then this heat production. We also already talked about these two, but we didn't say direct functions of muscles. So this heat production, once again, we have 3 different types that we can talk about. If we're talking about smooth muscle, we've already talked about these erector pili, these smooth muscle that are in your skin that are going to contract near the hair follicle, and when they contract, they make the hair follicle stand up. Well, once that muscle contracts, these erector pili release a little bit of heat, and that heat can be trapped underneath the air to warm us up. Another version, we can have shivering. So shivering is the non-conscious. We call it non-conscious instead of involuntary because when you think, okay, I need to stop shivering, you can force yourself to stop shivering. Unless you're dying, going into shock, that kind of stuff, then the shivering, you won't be able to stop it. But if you're just cold outside and you're like, man, I really need to stop shivering, you can force yourself to stop shivering. So this is skeletal muscle. Just a non-conscious, you don't think about it, but we don't call it involuntary. So this is skeletal. And then if you guys remember when we talked about those different serosae, the different layers of these serous membranes, we talked about the pleura, the peritoneum, and then the pericardium. This pericardium had serous fluid in it. We called it pericardial fluid, and one of those functions was to dissipate heat and friction whenever the heart's beating. So each time the heart contracts, it's going to shorten and thicken and expand, and each time it does that, it releases a little bit of heat. So that pericardial fluid was playing a role in dissipating the heat that's coming from this cardiac muscle. So all we're trying to say is that all 3 of these contract: cardiac, skeletal, and smooth muscle, and they all create heat. So some different examples: shivering for skeletal, the erector pili for smooth, and then the heart is this cardiac muscle. But this idea of the pericardial fluid was just showing that that the heat produced by this cardiac tissue is dissipated through this pericardial fluid. Okay, so like I said, when I think of functions, I think this is the result of contraction. So what happens when you contract? You move things. What happens when you contract? You get this maintenance of posture from muscle tone. You get this stabilization of joints from the muscle tone. Again, muscle tone is just contraction. And then this heat production, we just showed 3 examples of that as well.